Good morning, everyone. I'm Bree Stock. I'm a Master of Wine and Education Manager with the Oregon Wine Board. Today we are going to explore the personalities of Oregon Pinot Noir. Just a couple of housekeeping things in the meantime. You will be on mute, but you can enter any questions that you have for me through the toolbar and we will answer them in real time. And today's seminar will run through the major growing regions of Oregon and explore the personalities and history of Pinot Noir in these regions. I wanted to pop this slide in just so we can all reflect on this for a moment, as Pinot Noir is the great transmitter and communicator of site and place. I haven't found this to be true in any other region more so than in Oregon, where the clarity of the wines reflect each IVA here and the style of the winemaker making them. This is an image of Mount Hood on our doorstep, and I feel when I taste Oregon wines and explore Oregon wine regions, there's a feeling that runs through the community that is always grounded in offering this clarity and transparency of place and protecting the beauty around us and reflecting that in the glass in front of us. It's a little early to have a glass of Pinot in front of you, but if you, I would still encourage that as we run through this. So just as a reminder of where we are, Oregon is situated between the 42nd and 46th north latitude parallels. We are above California, and our growing regions run along the western regions, especially for Pinot Noir, and are reflective of a mild coastal climate. We have Washington to the north, which is primarily eastern in its IVAs. I wanted to pop this slide in just as a Google Earth reference so that you can really see how vibrantly green Oregon is in our growing regions, even more green and vibrant than California's coastal regions to our south. You really see how much the rainfall accumulates as you go north, and the forest images surrounding the Willamette Valley and Amity Valley regions and Columbia Gorge IVA. The geographical landmarks of Oregon, we are a region that is really defined by our coastal ranges, our mountain ranges, and our river systems. So all of these contribute to the style of wines that we can grow here. So the Pacific Ocean delivers a cool ocean influence. We have a buffering effect from the low-lying coast range along the Willamette Valley in the north, and then down through the Siskiyou Mountains, which provide, again, a lower-lying mountain range protecting from the Pacific Ocean weather. The Cascade Range to the east protects us from the harsh continental climate of eastern Oregon and the harsh winds, the hot winds during the summer and the cold snow-delivering winds in the winter. The Umpqua River, Rogue River, and Applegate Rivers are essential for the southern Oregon producers in delivering bright fruit-flavored wines with pronounced acidity. In the north, we have the Willamette Valley and the Willamette River system, which provides airflow and cooling winds through all of our growing regions. Temperature in Oregon, as you can see, the Willamette Valley and Columbia Gorge sit well within the cool and buffering into intermediate growing season temperatures by the climate scale, the UC Davis climate scale. Burgundy sits within intermediate just, and then Southern Oregon is also within intermediate. So this makes us fantastic growing regions for those cooler northern continental climate wines and alpine wines as well. As any grape grower in Oregon will tell you, it's the end of the season that makes a vintage in Oregon, and vintage variability is fierce in Oregon. We are limited in our harvest by when the storms run in off the Pacific Ocean in the late fall. Generally, we have a longer harvest than most other regions, and are often picking into October or November. But that said, we can have severe shifts in harvest, whether it's from 2011, one of the coolest harvests on records, that we picked into well into November, and some of the more recent harvests that have been much earlier, and picking begins in early September. The other key condition is our diurnal temperature swing in these areas. Being so far north, we have long daylight hours, but our shift in the evening is a cool climate influence coming in from the ocean, and drops our temperatures at night by 30 to 40 degrees. This gives us a long hang time, preserves acidity, and develops complex flavors. Rainfall in Oregon, as you can see from this image, all of our rainfall happens in the winter months. Our summers are very dry, and some of the driest on record, and most of our growing regions are dry grown. So we really do rely on the rainfall that happens during the fall and winter months to replenish our water, the water in our soils and our organic matter in the soils. Sunshine in Oregon. Thanks to our Oregon's latitude, the daylight hours are up to 16 hours a day in the peak of summer, and these are some of the longest found in any growing region. This allows us to get fully ripe, complex flavors in our wines. Grape varieties need not just warmth, but they need UV light as well, and our long extended daylight hours really provide this extended ripening platform, combined with our dry summers, dry days, and cool nights, allow our grape varieties to develop complex flavors while retaining acidity. Wine growing throughout the state, we are primarily focused in the west of the state. The Willamette Valley accounts for 72% of the grape growing in Oregon, and Southern Oregon accounts for 22%, and these are growing as well. These two areas are dominated by Pinot Noir, as is the Columbia Gorge AVA, and that's their dominant grape variety. Pinot Noir is our flagship variety. David Lett and Charles Curry began the first vineyards in Oregon in the 1960s with Pinot Noir. Richard Summers started the vineyards in the Umpqua Valley, in the northern Umpqua Valley, also in the early 1960s. We did have an industry prior to Prohibition, but Pinot Noir and the noble varieties really flourished in the late 60s and 70s. So 50% of Oregon's grape plantings are to Pinot Noir. This is a decreasing number. It was in the early 60s up until last year, and now we are introducing more diversity around the state as regions expand. But Pinot Noir is absolutely queen in our state and has a diversity of regions to present its pinosity through. Clonal history for Pinot Noir. In 1952, there were 3 introductions labeled as Blauburgunder sent to UC Davis from Wädenswil, Switzerland by Dr. Harry Olmo, who is one of America's great unsung viticulture heroes. All of these clones were selected for disease resistance and open clusters and wine quality. So Wädenswil, the Swiss clone, which dominates Oregon's production, especially in the North Willamette, is a Swiss clone which came from Burgundy, suspectedly through the 17th century through mercenaries. The selections that came into California were then further divided. They became known as FBS 1A, 2A, and 3A, and these are now known as the Wädenswil selections. All 3 became registered and available in 1962, and Clone 1A, which is the late to ripen variety, which gives nice spicy red fruit and floral notes, was the selection that David Lett brought north to the Willamette Valley along with Charles Currie. Clone 2 is still in existence, but didn't really make it to Oregon as it was a more consistent clone, but was said to make more boring, one-dimensional wines. Clone 3 was culled from the selections because it had leaf roll virus. Pommard is this other selection that Oregon is known for, and we refer to Wadensville, Pommard, and Currie as our heritage clones. Pommard was registered at UC Davis as clones 4, 5, and 6, and Charles Currie and Dick Erath, who started a grapevine nursery up in the Willamette Valley, promoted these varieties, these clonal selections. So Pommard and Wadensville were the main selections that were planted in the late 1960s and early 1970s. In the early 70s, Charles Currie, who was a UC Davis professor, struck out on his own as a nurseryman and offered a number of suitcase clones along with the California clones and Pommard. Many of the vines that Currie sold as Pommard have a distinctive character of their own in which tea leaf and spices dominate the palate and differing growth habits to the Pommard Selection 5. Some believe that this other clone was a French import, and others believe that it's a mixture of true Pommard and Martini clone, which came up from California as well. No matter whatever their history, these selections of Pommard that Currie sold have become known as the Currie clone and are distinctive and unique to themselves, and they've assumed a supporting role in Oregon's clonal history since many of the early vineyards were planted to just these 3 clones. So in the 80s, until the 1980s, Oregon producers only had those 3 clones of Pinot Noir available from the foundation block at Davis: Wadensville 2, Pommard 5, and FPS 18 to 21 was also brought in, which was a Gamay Noir, or misidentified as Gamay Noir. And Currie's selection of suitcase clones were the only available clonal material to plant vineyards with or expand vineyards with. While these 3 clones produced high quality and distinctive wines, producers were beginning to wonder what could be achieved with a greater diversity and selection of clones to match newer sites that they were discovering. So throughout the late 70s, Oregon growers, led by David Adelsheim, and researchers lobbied EU universities to send new material to Oregon State University. This led to the importation of some Alsatian varieties, primarily the white varieties, but also some Pinot Noir. But the Pinot Noir was considered not to be of the highest quality and so was not readily planted. Then Dr. Raymond Bernard of the Office National Interprofessionnel de Vin, or ONIVAN, in Dijon had taken an interest in Adelsheim's requests for better clonal material and had knowledge of Oregon wines through his friendship with David Lett. In 1984, he came to Oregon to present at the International Symposium on Cool Climate Viticulture and Enology to present on the performance of different Pinot Noir clones in Burgundy and their potential performance in other cool climates. It was then that he brought with him these other clones that were developed in Dijon. So these became known as the as the Dijon clones, 113, 114, 115, and then later 667 and 777 became identified as well and imported. New imports and heritage clones. Mariafeld was also imported from Switzerland, and like Wadensville is loose clustered and actually is now so different in its comparative style that it's suggested that it's Klevner and not Pinot Noir at all, and that is supported by Jancis Robinson's Grapes and Vines. So it's a darker cluster, darker colored and meatier style of Pinot Noir that comes in the Mariafeld style. As Pinot Noir has one of the longest documented lineages of any grape variety, with most all of our Pinot Noir plantings in the US today being genetically traced back to French origins, despite their shared origins, these plantings have grown genetically diverse over years of cultivation around the globe. And today we're rediscovering the heritage clones. So these French clones that have been raised and grown in California and other regions, so whether it's Switzerland or other parts of France, distinctively different Pinot Noir clones that we're now replanting. Historically, new vineyards have been propagated by field selection in the old world, which means that growers would generally walk through their field and identify specific high-performing vines within that vineyard or within optimum sites within their vineyard or region. So these are known as cuttings, taking a cutting from a parent plant, and this is what we have now in the new world. And in the old world, many of these vines would simply have been layered down into the ground or mothered into a cane. Through this process of isolating the best fit vines for the area, distinct clonal families have developed within Pinot Noir with unique characteristics. So the Dijon clones that were isolated and selected in Burgundy for their ability to ripen relatively early in the damp environment of the Côte d'Or have now reached widespread favor across California and Oregon and other parts of the New World, where they reliably ripen. However, with our recent warmer vintages and drier than average vintages we've seen lately, these clones can tend to have a rapid accumulation of sugars while acid levels plummet, but the fruit can remain slightly green due to a lag in the phenolic development. So this has led to the producers in California and in Oregon primarily seeking out heritage clones. These clones that have evolved in California through well-placed sites along the coast and the mountains. They're commonly named after the grower or a specific vineyard of origin, and these California heritage clones now ideally ripen along the moderate coast of California and tolerate the dry summers. So gradually ripening over a prolonged growing season to develop rich fruit with pronounced structure and depth without sugar spikes that expedite harvest and limit flavor development. These clones are now showing favor in Oregon and promising to add distinctive characters and structure to our already quite diverse Pinot Noir lineup. So we also have 828 and 943, which are said to be, these are French imports. 828 is supposedly a cutting from La Tâche. It's quite fruit forward and very black fruited, blackberries and plums, and tends to be a little masculine and excessive for Pinot Noir. 943, on the other hand, is a tiny, compact little grenade-like cluster that fits very easily into the palm of your hand. These flavors have intense strawberry and wild berry flavors with small juice to skin ratio, and actually give a lot of structure and aromatic flavor to the wines. Swan, Mount Eden, Jackson, Calera, and Giardini are some of the new heritage clones that are finding favor in some of Oregon's sites now and being planted in newer vineyards. So Oregon's growers and producers today have a multitude of clones to work with, and most now plant this diversity in their new sites or when they're replanting their existing vineyards. However, despite having dozens of certified clones at hand, the challenges are the same as for the original growers in our region. That is the need to find a good site, managing it well, farming site, and overbearing winemaking can also completely overshadow clonal selection as to make clone negligible if done poorly. But assuming that all of those things, site, farming, and winemaking, are done so with the utmost integrity and lightness of hand, then the right clones can raise a vineyard to greatness. And that's really what our growers in Oregon are now seeking with this diversity of clonal material. So Oregon has 19 IVAs. There are 7 nested IVAs now within the northern Willamette Valley, and we're going to run from north through south through the Pinot Noir regions of Oregon. So the Columbia Gorge, high desert-like conditions in the east of the valley around the Dalles, and in the west is where there is more ocean influence and rainfall around Hood River, and this is where the Burgundian clones have the most success. This is very much still an area of diverse agriculture, with orchards sharing the slopes with vines, and also an area being so close to Portland where there's a number of amazing hiking trails and mountain bike trails as well. So a very busy area that is showing great promise for Pinot Noir and Burgundian varieties. The main influence on flavor and sight in this area is the winds that blow through the Columbia Gorge. Being a lateral valley that runs east-west, the wind can really funnel through this valley. In fact, this Hood River area is known for its kiteboarding and windsurfing. It's one of the top destinations in the world. So in this area, wind breaks in the styles of forests and orchards are very important to protecting flowering and to stop the dehydration of fruit in the later harvest areas. The vines in this area are planted on the varied valley slopes under the gaze of Mount Hood, and cool climate varieties excel. Primarily, the soils here are volcanic basalts and loess soils, light alluvial glacial sediments that are blown in on top of the volcanic basalts, which tend to be very rich in organic matter and preserve water. These soils allow the vine's roots to dig deep into the water reserves to push through the very warm and windy growing season here. The combination of soil and wind produces Pinot Noir that is generally richly spiced, and the warm, dry conditions give ripe, dark, berry-fruited Pinot Noirs with fairly resolved, softened tannins and moderate acidities, depending, of course, on the elevation and the aspect of slope. There are only a handful of these wines that are actually exported out of the state, but those that are can offer a diversity of styles. So for a ripe and vibrantly spiced style, you might try the Phelps Creek wines from around the Hood River area. And Hayu Wine Farm at the western edge of the valley also focuses on Burgundian varieties, with Pinot Noirs and other blends of Burgundian varieties being produced. And Alema around the town of Mosier, just on the west-eastern side of Hood River, focuses on sparkling wines made from the Pinot Noir grape. Moving into the largest growing region for Pinot Noir and for wine production, the Willamette Valley. So vineyard plantings in the Willamette Valley account for 69% of the state's total planted vineyards, and 67% of this is Pinot Noir. So Pinot Gris is following, and Chardonnay is the variety that is quickly catching Pinot Gris and the white varieties. This area is focused in the north around the nested IVAs of the North Willamette. What influences the style of Pinot Noir made in the Willamette Valley? So we mentioned earlier the latitude, 40, 43, 45 degrees north. Latitude is a convenient but only hypothetical calculation when one looks at the hours of sunlight and the absence of rain during the growing season. And this is the real uniqueness of Oregon's climate. Up until June, the vines receive the same amount of sun as those in Burgundy. And then from July through September, Oregon has more. And Oregon actually has more sun than California during the growing season. So bud break, bloom, veraison, and harvest can take place a week or two after that of Burgundy in many years. Our wine grapes generally ripen quite slowly, and in September, we really have that drop in diurnal temperature as well, and a more cooling ocean influence coming in. So while bone tends to pick in mid-September, or early September these days, there's a lot more people in Oregon that are pushing even out until the end of October, the middle of October to pick Pinot Noir. Again, because of that extended daylight, but also the dry summers and the diurnal shifts, the grapes retain a lot of acidity and tend to ripen slowly, so the flavors are developing still into October to get that true phenolic ripeness. Again, this is something that is key to the success and style of Willamette Valley Pinot Noirs, the monthly average temperatures and the rainfall. So the Cascade Mountains to the east protect our valley, the Willamette Valley, from the hot and cold extremes of the continental interior, so those hot, dehydrating winds are blocked, and peak heat during the Willamette Valley summer growing season usually occurs between 2 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, with sunset occurring after 9 p.m. The Willamette Valley has a low-lying range of coastal hills on the western slopes, known as the Coast Range, and these ranges let through the cool winds and some rainfall. However, it's during the summer months that our climate is the driest. So in winter, we generally receive about 7 inches a month, but during the dry summer months, we receive less than half an inch in July and August, and often in June. So overall, Burgundy receives 28 inches of rainfall, but Oregon, or Willamette Valley, receives 44 inches. During the growing season in Burgundy, the rain continues to fall, and this gives disease pressure in the form of powdery and downy mildew botrytis issues. And instead, Oregon has such a nice, cool, dry climate and cool winds from the Pacific that we really have very low disease pressure, which also informs our farming practices. So very limited pesticide use and much more organic production in the Willamette Valley. So this would also explain why some of the flavors in Willamette Valley wines can be more fruit sweet and riper and sweeter than much Burgundy, because we're not getting the water adding any dilution to our flavors and extending or limiting the growing season in that manner. We've already touched on the wind, which runs through the Coast Range, and particularly the Van Duzer corridor, which is influential in not only creating our healthy vineyards, but also developing thick skins on our grapes, which gives our wines structure and savoriness. 3 major soil types in the Willamette Valley. The marine sediments are our oldest soils, and these are an uplifted ancient seabed from when Oregon was still underwater. Consists of eroded sandstone and siltstone. Marine sedimentary soils tend to have less water holding capacity than the volcanic soils, and the dry-grown vineyards mean that the vine roots in these sites are forced deep to scavenge for pockets of water and minerals. These marine sediments tend to be low in pH with less available nitrogen in the soil, and combined with the high annual rainfalls in our region, tends to create acidic soils and create wines with a high pH. The wines off of these sedimentary sites tend to be fairly fleshy, more purple-fruited, quite approachable with resolved tannins and soft spice notes. The basalt volcanic soils, basalt is volcanic stone that formed at or near the surface with exposure to oxygen. This is different to the other volcanic soils, granite, which is formed underground without exposure to oxygen and therefore is much harder. So these volcanic basalts can easily be manipulated by the roots, so that the roots of the vine can run deep into the water and mineral reserves. also within these basalt soils, the fine-grained soils also contain about half silica, and you can almost see this saltiness on the palate in the form of an acid saltiness on many of our Pinot Noirs. The fractured basalts also can be have a high level of iron in the soils, which easily turns red when it is exposed to oxygen. When these soils fracture, the area inside the cracks generally forms small particles of soil that act like iron-rich clay retaining waters and release mineral ions to the vine through our dry growing season. The wines from the volcanic basalt soils generally tend to be quite highly perfumed, very bright and lifted red fruit characters on the palate, with a distinctive ferrous, sanguine, bloody note to many of the wines. The loess soils are often overlaid over the volcanic basalts, and these are mostly found in the northern Willamette, especially around the Chehalem Mountain AVA. The loess is fine white and gritty textural particles. Over time, they become weathered and form small shot pebbles. And when wet, this loess soil sticks together and can be quite high draining. This can be stressful to younger vines, but vines with established root systems can easily perform through the long dry summers in the Willamette. As the vines get older, they root into the underlying basalt, which has a lot more water and nutrient holdings in those soils. The soils can be highly fertile, and so they tend to make wines with very floral, lifted aromatics and plenty of natural acidity. So really lovely, vibrant, delicate, perfumed styles from the loess soils. The Willamette Valley, as you can see, it was created in 1983. It's a large 3.5 million acre AVA with almost 24,000 acres planted. Again, the predominant soils across the entire AVA are marine sediments, volcanic, and loess. In the southern part of the Willamette Valley, there are currently no nested AVAs, although we do have a number of larger estates located between the capital Salem and Eugene. So these larger growers often provide a lot of the by-the-glass pour and entry-level wines to the region, and many of these larger producers are also farming with the same meticulous integrity of those in the north, of the smaller farmers in the north. And we have some of our largest biodynamic estates down in this area in the form of King Estate, which is just outside Eugene. Californians, Benton Lane, have moved into the area, and Antiquum Farms is another producer that's farming almost beyond biodynamics in the area. This area south of Eugene creates a lot of warmth in the Coast Range area. So it's really a sort of banana belt in the south there, and the wines from the southern parts are more dark and perfumed. You can also crop more heavily on the vines in this area, so making the wines a little more affordable to get into those by-the-glass pouring sections of the wine list. In the North Willamette, which is just a colloquial name for the region, there are 7 nested AVAs. The Van Duzer Corridor AVA is the newest AVA and is our 7th, so created in 2019 in January. All of the nested AVAs of the North Willamette Valley are above 200 feet in elevation, and they extend up to varying levels of elevation, some beyond 1,000 feet. Ponzi's Aurora Vineyard, one of the oldest families in the region, located in the Chehalem Mountains. So the Chehalem Mountains is the most diverse AVA in terms of soil division, where the loess soils, I like to think of Chehalem Mountains AVA as a dinosaur doing a yoga headstand. So I'll speak to it in terms of the upside down dinosaur. Put your creative eyes on. So the loess soils extend from the dinosaur's spine north toward Portland, And this is where you get some of those really perfumed, aromatic, gently cherry-flavored and juicy Pinot Noirs coming from. The acid levels in these soils are very high, and so they have a surprising amount of ageability to them and very, very delicate. You could look for producers like Ponzi, Raptor Ridge, and Rex Hill, who make wines from these low soils and in that very distinctive, elegant, red-fruited style. The head of the dinosaur is Parrot Mountain, and this part of the dinosaur, or part of the Chehalem Hills Mountains, is very volcanic in its soil makeup. So a lot of basalt, and it also has some of the highest elevation vineyards in the northern Willamette at over 1,000 feet. Those vineyards are mostly for sparkling, however, but you do have many producers at that 600 to 800 feet level of elevation, and again, volcanic soil, so much richer in their nutrient and water retention. They have a lot more dark fruit characters, so red cranberry, pomegranates, forest spices running through the palate, and again, vibrant acidities. Look for Beckham Estate, Carabella, J.K. Carrier as reliable producers of a very elegant volcanic style that can be very long-lived. Sedimentary Willackenzie and volcanic basalts sit on the spine running towards Ribbon Ridge. So in that area, you'll find some of the iconic pioneering producers like Adelsheim and Bergstrom. Rex Hill's Jacob Hart Vineyard is in this area as well. There are a number of vineyards that are planted on these alluvial washes, so you get a mixture of marine sediments, volcanics, and low soils all intermingled together, giving wines of really lovely complexity, quite richly fruited and fleshy, but very perfumed with light spices and hints of earthy structure, depending on how they're handled and the picking dates as well. Ribbon Ridge is distinctively unique and was isolated and created as its own AVA in 2005. It's a tiny AVA with only about 650 planted acres. It's basically an island of sedimentary Willackenzie free-draining, fairly nutrient-poor soil, and it creates some of the most iconic wines in the Willamette Valley. So very high-toned red fruits, pomegranates and cranberry, even ruby red grapefruit notes can appear, and this area has quite low rainfall. It's buffered to the west and north by buffered to the west by the Yamhill Carlton AVA and to the north by the Chehalem Mountains and the Bald Peak Bluff there. These wines have a very sweet glycerol red fruit palate, and this glycerol alcohol sweetness also provides a weightiness that belies the characters of the red fruit and spices that come with their fruit profile, but also provides an age-worthiness that really can extend their lives for an additional 5 to 10 years and produce some of the long-living wines of the area. So a lot of resolved tannins on these wines as well, and very approachable styles. Oak can give structure and sweet spice notes to the wines also. Some of them producers that I'd look out for are Beaufrere, Brickhouse, Goodfellow Wines, and Patricia Green Cellars, all very consistent producers that can be found in the national and international markets. Yamhill Carlton AVA, established in 2004. This is a larger AVA and is still being heavily planted. We have also a lot of the French producers moving in here as well. This AVA is surrounded on 3 sides by the Coast Range and Chehalem Mountains and Dundee Hills. This results in some of the warmest sheltered sites and some of the warmest growing season temperatures of the nested AVAs. The AVA is mostly coarse-grained ancient marine sedimentary soil that drains quite quickly. These soils, combined with the warmer growing season temperatures and protected vineyards leads to the earliest harvest dates of the nested AVAs, and these marine sedimentary soils and warmer mesoclimates result in wines that are ripe and full-bodied and often deeply extracted. They're quite texturally driven wines with a lot of blue fruits, purple florals, and red cola notes, layered with earth, chocolate, and dark spice flavors. Some of the iconic vineyards in the area include Shea and Resonance, which you may see on labels. And then consistently high-quality performers in this area include, well, kind of listed from a bigger, richer style perspective. If you like something that's a little fleshier, meatier, and more extracted, you would be drawn to the wines by Ken Wright, by Shea, Penarash, and Lemelson. And moving into wines that are more reflective of a lighter style with less extraction and less oak influence, you'd look towards Soter, Anemy, Belpont, Flaneur, and Minimus. Dundee Hills AVA, established in 2004. This is one of, again, the most iconic AVAs. The Red Hills of Dundee is home to the famed oxidizing volcanic red Jory basalts, which provide excellent drainage and warmth to the vines. This is an area that is sometimes referred to as a bit of a banana belt. It's protected by the Chehalem Mountains and by Yamhill Carlton AVA, and the Pinot Noirs in this area really do not see a lot of stress during the growing season in the form of winds from the coast. They ripen very evenly, and they have a reputation for being very silky, very perfumed. They're very, very distinctive. This is the deep red cherry cola style palettes and perfumed florals, and then move into truffle notes in the cooler vintages. The most distinctive character of the Dundee Hills Pinot Noir is the inescapable mid-palate silkiness that provides elegance and length to all of these wines, no matter what the vintage conditions. The classic producers in this AVA, again, ranging in style from rich and fleshy through to more polished and ethereal styles, would be Domaine Serene, Archery Summit, Stoller, Alexander, and Sokolblosser, through to the original vineyard in the area, the Eyrie Vineyards, Domaine Drouin, Erath, White Rose, Cameron, Kelly Fox, and Marsh Vineyards. McMinnville, primarily volcanic soils with very thin topsoils. It was established in 2005. Here, the volcanic formation is unique marine bedrock that's called Nestucca Formation, and it's the lack of topsoil in this area that really forces the vine roots deep into the earth in search of water and nutrients, and gives really dark, complex, broodingly powerful wines. In addition to the soil struggles that present themselves in the vineyards here, the wines are connecting with the Van Duzer corridor, so that's the southerly section of the AVA that really gets hit by the brunt of the Van Duzer winds. The Van Duzer winds run in, hit the Eola Amity Hills, and push up through McMinnville. So this produces grapes that have quite thick skins and high skin-to-juice ratios, quite tiny berries, and very good acid retention. It often really is a case of who the winemaker is when you're dealing with McMinnville grapes and their experience of working with the wines off of these sites. A heavy hand on any of these wines will result in wines that are very masculine and can turn into almost brutes of Pinot Noirs if you do excessive punch downs or pump overs. So learning to be hands off and letting the site speak has been very rewarding in tasting the wines from Maysara, Britton, Winderley, Courtier, Kelly Fox in this area. Some of the vineyard names that you might know and see on labels as a vineyard designate from this AVA are Highland Estate, Mumtazi Vineyard, which is one of the largest biodynamic producers in the area, Meredith Mitchell also. That's an image of Highland Vineyard. The Eola Amity Hills. So established in 2006, but there were vineyards planted here in 1977, defined by the Van Duzer corridor, which is provides a gap in the for the cool ocean winds to blow through drop the temperatures in the late afternoon. Again, this affects the berry size and the thickness of the skins, creating quite tannic structured wines with very savory flavors to them. Primarily very shallow soils, so all volcanic in nature or mostly volcanic in nature, Nakaya, Woodburn, and some Jory soil deposits. There are some listed marine sedimentary rocks and sandstone in pieces. And again, most affected by that Van Duzer corridor. So the combination of thin topsoil and the cool winds coming off the Van Duzer corridor really result in grapes that are small and thick-skinned. They tend to be very structured and have a real true minerality to them. The grapes here are generally harvested 2 to 3 weeks later than the Dundee Hills AVA. And the berries, again, very small and structured and can be some of the longest-lived Pinot Noirs in the area. I find the wines from Eola Amity Hills to be quite dark and savory and have a lot of tea leaf components to them and a natural iodine and mineral component that melds in with those cranberry and forest fruit characters. These are not always the earliest drinking wines, but if I was going to build a cellar or a wine list that could show how wines age in this area, these wines really do reward cellaring and patience. So very distinctive structured styles of wine. Temperance Hill is one of the vineyard designates in this AVA that is organically and meticulously farmed by Di Crisp. And almost every producer of high repute in the Willamette Valley has a Temperance Hill designate wine if you can get your hands on the fruit. Producers to watch out for in the Eola Amity Hills AVA, from the pioneers, Bethel Heights and Christum and Evesham Wood, to newcomers who are showing really leading the way in terms of style and developing the Chardonnay narrative down in this area as well, are Evening Land, Walter Scott, Hopewell, Domaine Drouin, and Lingua Franca. And that's a view from Temperance Hill Vineyard. And finally, to the newest AVA in the North Willamette Valley. This is the Van Duzer Corridor AVA, which sits, it abuts up to the Eola Amity Hills. So this is a lower lying AVA than the Eola Amity Hills. Is fairly small at the moment, although 1,000 acres planted. Marine sediments dominate the soils here, and some Helvetian clays, sandstone sediments, and again, that low-lying hills really gets hit by the Van Duzer corridor winds. So if you moved west, directly west, you would be entering into the coast range, which really funnels those winds through. The wines tend to be very brightly aromatic and red-fruited here, with distinctive salt and umami notes and some sanguine, meaty edges as well, and really vibrant structured acidities. There's only currently a handful of estates in the area, like Illahee, Left Coast, Van Duzer, and Johan. All make outstanding wines, but Johan also is one of the largest biodynamic producers in the Northern Willamette and in this AVA, definitely. And the wines from the grapes from Johan are very diverse in their plantings in terms of they have all of the California heirloom selections planted, as well as the newer Dijon selections, and the old heritage Oregon clones of Puri, Pomard, and Basensville. Bow and Arrow, Division Wine Co., Briande, and Chadstock's origin and minimus wines all often come from this vineyard. And that's an image of Van Duzer Estate. You can see how low-lying the hills are there, rolling hills rather than steeper slopes that are found in the north. Moving into southern Oregon, where we still have Pinot Noir as our dominant grape variety, although this is measured out or more evenly balanced by Rhone varieties, Bordeaux varieties, and Tempranillo. Southern Oregon AVA actually kisses the Willamette Valley AVA right at the basin of the same name, the Willamette Valley River Basin. And the Southern Oregon AVAs has even higher diurnal shifts and has some of the highest diurnal shifts of any wine region in the world. Again, vineyards need to be focused around the river systems here to avoid frost and also promote that constant air movement and cool down the vineyards during the warm growing season. So plantings, the region accounts for around 24% of the state's total planted vineyard. 44% is dedicated to Pinot Noir, and very diverse geology, varied climates, and again, the mountains and river aspects are the most influence on grape style and production in this area. Again, a similar story as to the Willamette Valley, similar weather patterns, much more severe continental-like conditions here, so very scorchingly hot days in the summer and temperatures that plummet to more than sweater weather in the evening. This helps moderate the fruit's brightness and freshness and helps keep the acidities in the wine. Again, 3 soil types: marine sediment, the oldest of the soils, which is quite hard sandstone bedrock in many vineyards, weathered basaltic lava flows, and a lot of alluvial stream sediments that sit atop of those volcanic lava flows. And there are some rocky and granitic river benches through the Applegate Valley as well. The Umpqua Valley, again, protected by the Cascades to the east and the Klamath Mountains to the west. There are low passes through the river valleys that allow the cool Pacific Ocean winds and fog to fill the Umpqua Valley, which delays the heat of the summer days and cools the vineyards at night. Elevation also plays a crucial role in the preservation of acidity in this AVA. With a degree drop in temperature for every mile climb in elevation, they really do rely on these diurnal shifts and elevation to preserve the brightness of the fruit in the area and the acidities. Pinot Noir tends to be planted on larger sloping plots, and because of the ripeness and warmth of the region, they generally tend to be a little more simple fruited, so red berries, cherries, and we don't really have too many vineyard designates down in this area, so we're still really exploring the potential of Pinot Noir in this area, but you could definitely say that the Pinot Noirs tend to be more medium to medium plus in body with moderate acidities, quite fruit forward, and forest floor characters. Elkton is a unique AVA off to the west of the Umpqua Valley AVA. So it's one of the AVAs that sits closest to the Pacific Ocean. It's dedicated to cool climate varieties, so Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, and Pinot Noir. The Pinot Noir from Elkton is unique in the Southern Oregon AVA. So the Pinot Noir is generally quite taut and vibrant, and has mid-palate fleshiness from the long hang time and red forest fruits. Because the ocean is just 20 miles away, it funnels down the Umpqua River Valley, and aspect and microclimate here is very important. So many of the vineyards are nestled within the protected slopes or the protected valleys of the snaky Umpqua River here. Brandborg and Bradley are the vineyards and wines to look for from this AVA, but now there are even producers from Portland and the Willamette Valley that are seeking out fruit from this area, such as Division and Statera wines. The Rogue Valley, so moving south from the Umpqua Valley, we have just around Grants Pass, we move into the Rogue Valley. It's generally the lower portion of the southern Oregon AVA. It's generously sunny with growing season average temperatures that sit around 90 degrees. The Pinot Noir vineyards here are planted mostly on sedimentary and sandstone loam soils, protected on all three sides by the Cascades, Klamath, and Siskiyou Mountains. It's a short, hot growing season that produces Pinot Noir more in line with the nearby California coast regions, quite plush and fully ripe, with lots of red and black fruit flavors and a lot of spice to them. They're very approachable and age quite well. Elevation and site selection are key, along with quality farming and quality winemaking. Very sun-kissed and expressive and approachable Pinot Noirs in the Rogue Valley and in the Applegate Valley. Few of these wines are actually exported out of the state, as they're snapped up by visiting tourists and by thirsty locals, but you can find Irvine and Roberts or possibly Danson, and then many of the Oregon labeled bottlings that you will find on by the glass lists or retail shelves around the nation come from this area. So A to Z, Union Wine Company, and Circle Bloss's Evolution Wines, and Joe Dobbs, they all source fruit from the Southern Oregon AVA and the Rogue Valley. So here, purchasing fruit that is ripe and fleshy and approachable early on in its life and doesn't require extended aging or excessive aging in oak to soften tannins and acidity. These really make a very good mid-palate filler for some of the blends with Willamette Valley fruit. So if you see something that has an Oregon label on it, often a lot of the fruit will come from this southern area and again be a little more akin to those California styles of Pinot Noir coming out of Alexander Valley and Sonoma Coast area. And this is some of the views from the Southern Oregon AVA. This is Rogue Valley. So valley floor plantings on benchlands and very protected by the elements from these high mountain ranges. And as you can see in there, there's a frost protection fan to keep the air moving in those areas. Irvine Roberts Vineyard, this is planted to Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay, and again makes riper, fleshier styles of Pinot Noir that are very approachable and still have really lovely, typical Oregon Pinot Noir elegance to them. Reading an Oregon label. So as mentioned, we were just discussing the Oregon labeling. So if it's labeled as an Oregon wine, the wine can be sourced from anywhere in the state, but 100% of the fruit must be from Oregon. 90% of the wine must be from the named variety, as Oregon has stricter standards on varietal integrity than other states do. This wine can be made out of state. So some producers can purchase fruit from Willamette Valley, Columbia Gorge, Southern Oregon AVA, transport it out of the state to Washington or California or Idaho and make it into a Pinot Noir, but it must be labeled as Oregon Pinot Noir only, even if it comes from just a single AVA. The label level above that, which would be the regional AVA level, means that 95% of the grapes must be from the named AVA. So the Willamette Valley AVA may have Southern Oregon fruit blended into it, up to 5%, and they must be produced in Oregon. They don't have to be produced entirely they do have to be produced entirely in the main AVA noted. The nested AVAs, so all of the 7 nested AVAs of the northern Willamette Valley, again, same labeling restrictions apply. 95% of the grapes must be from the named AVA, and 90% of the named variety must be on the label. The more exclusive estate and vineyard designate wines must be at least 95% of the wine from the designated vineyard. And if it's labeled as an estate wine, then 100% of the grapes grown for that wine must be grown in that AVA, in that estate at the direction of that producing winery. All of the production occurs under the control of the winery without leaving the winery. You will generally find that most wines labeled as Oregon can very easily fit the by-the-glass pour or accessible retail sector. And then as you move up the pyramid, we tend to get more exclusive and more focused, and generally these will move into more of the bottle listing pours. There's a number of Willamette Valley and Southern Oregon wines now that are really seeking for that by the glass pour price point, and then the nested AVAs above that. So within the Oregon category, you can really focus on across the state designations by having an Oregon or Southern Oregon Rogue Valley labeled wine, moving into the Willamette Valley, so for BTG pours, and then the nested AVAs. And all of those AVAs have such distinctive characteristics to them that they're very fun to explore in a tasting format, or even as an aging format as well. So you could design your wine list or retail section by volcanic soils versus sedimentary soils, approachable wines versus those that need a little more time, clonal material. Most of the heritage Oregon clones will be found in the Dundee Hills and Chehalem mountain sites, whereas Eola, Yamhill, McMinnville, Van Duzer corridor tend to have more diversity in terms of the clonal material that was available at the time. So exploring the clones can be another exciting and interesting format for a wine list category as well. We've already discussed the varietal declaration, but just as a reminder, Oregon is different to other states in that we do have higher integrity applied to varietal labeling, so 90% for Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, and more than 50 other varieties. And mainly the Rhone and Bordeaux varieties are the ones that are allowed to be blended. In Oregon, also for the regional, we also have more strident integrity rules there as well. Oregon's ongoing commitment to sustainability. As mentioned earlier, we have some of the highest certified sustainable acreage in the U.S. So 47% of our producers are certified sustainable, and Oregon accounts for 35% of total U.S. Demeter biodynamic vineyards. And this is only the certified. Many people practice these extreme organics or biodynamic farming techniques and may not be certified. We are also the largest region in the world who has the most number of certified B Corp wineries, which reflects our commitment to social equity as well. Commitment to quality. Again, 1% of Oregon's share is what we produce domestically, so very small in terms of our production. We're the fourth or fifth largest producer in the U.S. now, but we occupy more than 20% of Wine Spectator's 90+ scores for domestic wine. And again, we have growing consumer demand. As the trend for less consumption increases, people are spending more on that bottle of wine when they do consume wine, and Oregon seems to be that category that is really hitting that market gap. So our average bottle price is much higher than California or Washington, primarily because of the size of our producers and the amount that it takes to farm and produce our wines. But we're also the largest growing retail category as well, and still in growth at almost 20% growth, which is remarkable for that price point, and considering that the consumption among consumers is declining. So again, Oregon hits that gap for being that one bottle a week or the special night out, purchasing that higher price bottle, really relating it to our quality in the glass. This can also increase your check averages. So keep that in mind when you're, building your wine lists, that people are familiar and expect quality from Oregon and are willing to pay for it. If you're interested in more Oregon wine info, please visit our trade site, trade.oregonwine.org, and you can download all of these resource materials and create your own PowerPoints. You'll find industry statistics, all of the history of Oregon wine and its environmental stewardship, and lots of maps and facts and webinars. Or you can reach out to our trade relations manager, Christina Diamant, at christina@oregonwine.org for any of your questions. A little note from Eric Asimov when he visited in 2017. If there are any questions, please feel free to enter any questions right now.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, this is Christina, Bree's colleague, Trade Relations Manager for the Oregon Wine Board. I'll be following up after this presentation with a recording of the webinar.